Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that the Sarah Mahfoud versus Danila Ramos fight that was supposed to be going down last month has been rescheduled for later on this one. Reportedly, I think it was that Sarah suffered an injury of some kind, illness or injury or something, that saw the fight getting moved from last month to this month. Sarah Mahfoud, the former champion, Danila Ramos, the world title challenger. Sarah Mahfoud sports a professional record of 14 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 3 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 16 professional bouts. She's not big on power.
And neither is Danila.
Danila sports a professional record of 13 wins with 3 losses, no draws, 1 knockout, having never been knocked out in the same number of fights as Sarah Mahfoud. Scheduled for 10 rounds in the women's featherweight division, where Amanda Serrano still reigns as that division's only lineal, Ring Magazine, and unified champion, where Skye Nicholson holds the WBC title, and where Nina Menke holds the IBF.
Where this contest is taking place between Sarah, who's 35 years old, to Danila, who's 39. Both fighters are orthodox fighters. Both fighters like to beat those feet, move around, use the ring. I think Danila does show a bit more mean streak than Sarah. She's a little bit more spiteful.
But Sarah does have 1 or 2 advantages, that she is the younger, fresher fighter of the two, that she will have home field advantage, as this fight is going down in her native Denmark. It's going down in her neck of the woods.
Uphill battle for Danila. She would have to go in there and make it emphatic.
To win a points decision or try to take it out of the judges' hands by scoring a knockout, and Danila only having 1 recorded knockout, not being a knockout merchant, it's safe to say this fight might go to the cards. In all likelihood, this fight will end in a decision.
Uphill battle for the away fighter.
And so, Danila Ramos was pretty active, pretty busy last year. She fought 3 times last year, and she's already fought once, this one, back in August against Valeria Munoz, who she beat by way of a points decision in a 6-rounder. This Sarah Mahfoud fight will be her 2nd fight of this year. Sarah's still coming off that lopsided points decision loss to Skye Nicholson in April of this year. This is her rebound fight. I'll give her credit for going with Danila Ramos. There are easier fighters to fight than Danila in what is a rebound fight to get back in the winner's bracket. She could have chose someone easier. Danila can give her some work, give her some rounds.
Push back.
And I do respect that Sarah decided to go with Danila instead of someone easier. So the way it is, Danila's coming off a win, Sarah's coming off a loss, but Sarah is younger and fresher, and the fight is happening in her neck of the woods. Slight edge to the former champion,
who can still make herself useful in what is an ever-changing featherweight division.
Talked about how Amanda Serrano still holds 2 alphabet titles in this division, the WBO title and the WBA title. With the Katie Taylor rematch looming and a potential Serrano win, it's hard to imagine that Amanda is going to keep those 2 alphabet titles at featherweight, the WBO and the WBA. It seems to me that sooner or later, she's going to drop them. She's going to vacate those titles.
She beats Katie Taylor. I don't see why she would go back down to 126. For what?
I feel like if she wins, she's going to drop those 2 alphabet titles, and that will be 2 more opportunities for fighters like Danila and fighters like Sarah to become champions themselves in what is an ever-changing featherweight landscape.
We already know they can't beat Amanda for them. They both tried.
Amanda already beat Sarah Mahfoud, and she already beat Danila Ramos. Their best bet to become champions now is if one or some titles go vacant, and very soon, I think they will. Division still needs fighters like Danilo Ramos and Sarah Mahfoud, experienced fighters, vetted fighters, for the likes of Akaris Ardingstall, Sophia Leash, Elizabeth Oshoba, those unbeaten up-and-comers that are talented but still need more experience. They need fighters that can push them and make them work.
It's good.
So the winner of this fight, the outcome will be decided later on this month on the 22nd, and we'll see what shakes out. I'm leaning towards a Sarah Mahfoud points win, and we'll see if that happens. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, another look at Conor Benn's situation as Conor is closer to boxing return after being cleared of doping offenses. Conor Benn has moved closer to a ring return to boxing after the Independent National Anti-Doping Panel lifted his suspension for 2 failed drug tests way back there in 2022, 2 years ago. It's been that long. Benn was under a provisional suspension after failing 2 voluntary drug tests ahead of a scheduled fight with Chris Eubank Jr. in October of 2022, with that bout canceled after he tested positive for the banned substance clomiphene. He had his license removed by the British Boxing Board of Control, and although his provisional suspension was lifted by the NADP in July of last year, it was subsequently reinstated following a successful appeal by the BBBofC and the UK anti-doping agency, UKAD. The National Anti-Doping Panel reversed that decision, saying it was not comfortably satisfied that UKAD had proved the 28-year-old had committed a doping offense, with Benn then issuing a statement on social media to welcome that decision. A UKAD spokesman said, UKAD notes that professional boxer Mr. Conor Benn has made public comments regarding the outcome of proceedings before the Independent National Anti-Doping Panel. UKAD can confirm that it received the decision of the NADP. The panel concluded that it was not comfortably satisfied that UKAD had proved that Mr. Benn had committed an anti-doping rule violation for the use of clomiphene. The provisional suspension previously in place has been lifted, and the charge against him has been consequently dismissed.
So why are they saying he spoke ahead of time? Why are they saying he spoke before the NADP reached their decision? They're confirming their decision themselves.
Case dismissed. The BBBOC is yet to confirm whether or not it will reinstate Benn's license required to allow him to fight in Britain again. The governing body said it is considering its position in a short statement released on Thursday.
So Conor Benn fought 2 times last year, 2 times right here in the United States after the NADP initially lifted the suspension, but before the BBBOC appealed that decision.
And they were granted their appeal, thus Conor Benn has sat out for most, though not all, but still most, of this year. No big Riyadh season shows for him.
Riyadh season paydays.
But that is all set to change next year. The NADP has once again lifted the provisional suspension placed upon him, and if that sticks, the BBBOC won't have a choice but to license him. You won't have reasonable grounds to deny him his ability as a boxer to earn money, to earn a living.
Enough already.
Statement from the BBBOC on Conor Benn. The BBBOC is aware that Conor Benn issued a public statement in relation to proceedings between UKAD and him. The BBBOC refers to the statement published in response by UKAD. We are considering our position. Is it possible that they will once again appeal the NADP's decision to drag this out even further? Being honest, it's been 2 years. That's long enough. If the message that you were trying to send is that the United Kingdom does not have a revolving door policy on fighters who test positive for banned substances, I think by now you've communicated that message. There's no need to drag this out any longer.
The way they've been going after this kid.
And I'm not even saying that they didn't have their reasons, that they didn't have grounds to do so. I'm just saying that enough time has passed that it's time to put this to bed and move on. NADP says they're not comfortably satisfied with the case they're levying against Conor that he broke a rule.
Why not?
Some details are still left to the imagination, but I remember that initially, it wasn't UKAD that busted Conor. It was VADA, and the BBBOC doesn't work with VADA. They work with UKAD. They have their own anti-doping agency over there.
Both of which tested Conor.
And I remember reading that while Conor Benn's samples via VADA tested positive for clomiphene, his samples via UKAD didn't test positive for anything. He was clean as far as UKAD is concerned, and UKAD is who the BBBOC regularly uses,
Works with.
in order to dispense dispense punishment in these situations. So can you use a third-party agency to penalize a fighter?
Is this what the NADP isn't comfortable with?
Satisfied with? That the BBBOC doesn't actually work in tandem with VADA, and they have no oversight over how they do things. So are their findings, positive or otherwise, admissible in a fight that takes place in the United Kingdom?
Is this what they're not comfortably satisfied with?
I'm not sure, but at any event, it looks like Conor Benn is en route to make his ring return next year.
He's gonna need a tune-up fight.
So the last time Conor Benn saw action before the provisional suspension was reinstated was earlier this year in February. We're actually closer to February of next year than we are to February of this one. And before you put Conor in a big fight, he's gonna need a tune-up first.
Do you think they'll revisit that Chris Eubank Jr. fight?
I know that a lot of people are fatigued, tired of hearing about that fight, but as soon as they make it, that's as soon as it'll take some people to buy a ticket. It still is a big fight in the UK if you can make it.
But what I would prefer,
If he can make it, is for Conor Benn to get back down to 147 after a tune-up fight and see about challenging the winner of Stanionis versus Gaiasov. See about challenging the winner of Mario Barrios versus Abel Ramos.
see about picking up an alphabet title in the welterweight division.
You don't think they should see about fighting Brian Norman?
Brian Norman and his team hustle backwards. You turned down a seven-figure payday, a career-high payday to unify with Boots to go box on a prospect's undercard. You guys are backwards.
And I don't think that Conor Benn should waste any time on you. I feel like he would sooner get the winners, the champions of those other fights in the ring, than he'd get the Normans in the ring.
The Normans think they're smart.
They're not. And the other outlying factor that Eimantas Stanionis and Mario Barrios are PBC fighters. The PBC that only did 5 shows this calendar year, 4 of which were pay-per-views and 2 of which were Canelo Alvarez fights.
So?
They don't got a lot of fight dates over there. They ain't got a lot of fight dates, they ain't got a lot of money, they ain't got a lot of nothing. So if you're a PBC fighter and you actually have a belt, you're a champion. When next year gets here, you might have to go somewhere else, to some other side of the street to make money, because the PBC ain't got any.
Conor can use that to his advantage.
Conor can use that to get some of those PBC fighters with belts in the ring. That if Stanionis manages to stay champion after the Gaiasov fight, and Barrios manages to stay champion after the Ramos fight,
What are they gonna do after that?
that is, what is the PBC gonna have them doing after that? I hate to break the news to you, but there's no money. There's no money in a Barrios versus Stanionis fight. That if both champions manage to stay champions after their next fights,
There's no money in them unifying with each other. They'd make more fighting Conor.
thus, on the eve of Conor's ring return next year, I would prefer to see him campaign at welterweight. I would prefer to see him see about fighting for an alphabet title than getting back to pursuing that Chris Eubank Jr. fight that I am tired of hearing about.
Sick of it.
I'd rather see him fight a champion at 147 than Chris at 160. And finally, according to boxing insider Rick Glacier, Canelo is looking for a guy to fight that someone will financially back. Canelo has a ready-made fight waiting with Terence Crawford, including Turkey El Sheikh's backing. But Canelo has shown no interest whatsoever in fighting Terence. That's all you need to know.
As it pertains to Canelo, as it pertains to Terence,
From what I am told, Crawford wants no fights at 154 presently, as he is all in on fighting Canelo. If the Canelo fight doesn't happen, in my opinion, he might look to unify at 154, but Crawford's intent and steadfast on fighting Canelo, so
it's basically Canelo or nobody. That would explain why he let Sebastian Fundora off the hook with an immediate segue.
that would have forced Sebastian Fundora to either satisfy him as his mandatory challenger or vacate the brown belt. This explains why Terence allowed him a voluntary, allowed him to move on to fight somebody else, at least temporarily, that somebody else being Errol Spence Jr.
A separate matter.
But that explains it. He's focused on Canelo, and he only really wants Canelo more than he wants to unify this division.
My thoughts.
I don't got the same energy for this fight, rather this conversation, because that's all it really is right now. I don't have the same energy for this conversation that I used to. Mostly because it's been talked to death, there's not much new to add to it, not much to say, and you're talking about two guys that are already so accomplished. that if the both of them retired today, they would be guaranteed a first ballot Hall of Fame slot.
By now, everybody views them as two of the best fighters in the sport. Mostly everybody.
I'm just bored with it, if I'm being honest, and I'm ready to move on, ready for something new. This weekend's fights are a prime example. You've got an unbeaten up-and-comer in Keyshawn Davis about to fight in a very intriguing fight in what is a very intriguing situation. Two unbeaten champions on Saturday in Bam Rodriguez and Jaron Ennis that are going to be defending their titles.
That I don't want to have to keep talking about the same thing.
And fighters that are consistently singing the same tune. That if what Canelo Alvarez wants is a fight that can get him the kind of money he's been making, and then some, Terrence is right there.
He's right there.
It wouldn't be the first time that Canelo Alvarez fought a smaller fighter that's moving up in weight. He did that in Amir Khan. He did that more recently with Jermell Charlo. That fighting Terrence Crawford shouldn't be out of the question. It shouldn't be off the table. But if he doesn't want to do it, then he doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And for Terrence, if the only fight that gets your juices going, if the only fight that's out there that motivates you is the Canelo fight, but you can't have it, then you can't have it.
Retire.
You've got a belt. You've got a title. You've got the WBA junior middleweight title. And if you're not interested in defending it, and you're not interested in unifying it because you're so focused on Canelo,
But you can't get him.
then just retire. Just drop the belt and retire because you're 37 years old. You know that I'm kind of ready for the both of them to go. I'm kind of ready for both Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford to call it a career so that we can usher in a new generation of boxers, start up a new generation of conversations involving them, because this is going nowhere and it's boring.
We don't need more fights like the Edgar Berlanga fight.
I understand that Canelo Alvarez has paid his dues and he's earned the right to choose, like I haven't heard that a million times or said it a million times myself.
I have.
But it's boring. And if Canelo is not interested in the William Skulls or the Christian Mobilis of the world, the Diego Pachecos, that's fine. That's his prerogative. But he's not interested in Terrence either.
It's boring.
While pledging fealty to these fighters that don't even know who you are, what you guys tend to forget is this is supposed to be entertaining. This is supposed to be entertainment. Well, having to mull over this same conversation over and over, weeks and weeks and for months,
It's boring.
that after all these weeks, nothing has really changed. There are no new developments.
Terrence fought in August.
Canelo fought a month later in September, and here in November, there's still no new news. Nothing has changed.
It's the same.
I just don't know who it is Canelo Alvarez is expecting to fight that makes for a big fight unless he's no longer interested in fighting in the big fights.
And I just don't know how Terrence could have it all riding on a fight with a guy that does what he wants and has been doing what he wants for as long as I can remember. You can't guarantee, you can't bank on getting a Canelo Alvarez fight. And if that's the only fight you're sticking around for,
If that's the only one, you may not get it, so you may as well retire. Retire now!
do it.
He's only 2 fights away from becoming a 3-time undisputed champion. Unheard of, unprecedented, but that's all it would take. 2 fights. If that don't motivate you,
Retire.
because you were never guaranteed a Canelo fight.